Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Julia Kim. Here's what's coming up on this week's show. Anti-Arab sentiment is growing in Turkey. Amid a worsening economic crisis, many Turks feel migrants and refugees have overstayed their welcome. Also coming up, we'll speak to Pauline Ades-Mevel from Reporters Without Borders about the death of the jailed Iranian writer Bhattacharyya. And does Egypt have what it takes to win an 8th Africa Cup of Nations? More on that later on in the programme. But first, Iraq's new parliament held its first session last Sunday, nearly 3 months after a general election result disputed by powerful pro-Iran factions. Tensions spilled over at the meeting, with the eldest member of parliament having to be hospitalised, apparently due to stress. The chaotic inaugural session marks the first step to forming a new government in Iraq. Yuka Roya has the story.
Chaotic scenes as Iraq's parliament convened its first session 3 months after a general election. Soon after the 329 new members were sworn in, heated arguments started among rival Shiite blocs, including one led by Muqtada al-Sadr, over which group held a parliamentary majority. Amid the disarray, acting Speaker Mahmoud al-Mashahadi suddenly fell ill and was taken to hospital, resulting in the session being briefly suspended.
Nothing happened, just one of the members objected to the nomination of the parliament speaker, which caused dissatisfaction and disagreement by the party, who submitted its objection, and this led to what happened.
The event reflects ongoing tensions in the country following last October's snap election, whose results have been contested by powerful Iran-backed factions. Al-Sadr's coalition, which came first in the election, winning 74 seats, has said it wants to form a coalition with Kurdish and Sunni blocs. Their Shiite rivals, including the Fatah Alliance and Nasser coalition, have gathered under the name of the Coordination Framework with 59 members. They've made claims of election fraud. The adjourned parliament convened once again with lawmakers, with Sadr's backing, re-electing Mohammed al-Halbousi as Sunni as Speaker.
We fulfilled our duties to have the first parliamentary session held and to complete the legal procedures and protocols during this session.
The new Iraqi parliament has 30 days to elect the country's president, who will name the prime minister chosen by the largest coalition bloc. The premier will then have another 30 days to form a government.
Now, last Saturday, jailed Iranian poet and filmmaker Bhattacharyya died after contracting COVID-19. The 48-year-old caught the virus in prison and eventually succumbed to the illness in hospital. But right groups are furious. They say his death was preventable, and this is yet another example of Tehran silencing its critics. Abtin had been serving a 5-year sentence on charges of illegal assembly and collusion against national security and spreading propaganda against the state. Well, our guest today is Pauline Ades-Mevel from Reporters Without Borders. Thank you very much for joining us today on the programme. Now, your organisation blames the Iranian government for Bhattacharyya's death. Tell us why.
The problem is that the journalist and the writer was not given the treatment he needed. I think it was very clear at the moment when Iran was going through a big wave of COVID-19 in the spring, when we shouted saying that he needed some treatment. On purpose, the government did nothing, the authorities did nothing. And as you said, this could have been avoided. It could be alive. And we are extremely worried because this case is not unique. There are some other journalists, writers currently in jail who need treatments. And so it is absolutely essential that they get treated.
Now, we're seeing, of course, a degradation of press freedoms around the world. Tell us more about the situation specifically in Iran.
Well, the situation is very, very difficult in Iran. So ranked 173rd out of 180 countries in our annual index, which means that the situation is bad. It's still one of the world's most repressive countries for journalists, subjecting news and information to relentless control. 860 journalists and bloggers have been prosecuted, arrested, imprisoned, and in some cases executed, like last year, Mr. Zam, who was executed since the revolution of 1979. And there is no sign of relaxing this harassment against the press and the media. Every single day we have to deplore some pressure on a journalist or some imprisonment in the country. So intimidation, arbitrary detention, a very, very tense atmosphere for journalists right now.
Okay, Pauline Ades-Mevel, thank you very much for your time today here on Middle East Matters. We really appreciate it. Well, moving on now, and Turkey is home to more refugees than any country in the world, most of them from Syria. But as the economic crisis there worsens, many Turks feel they've overstayed their welcome. This next report looks at the growing hostility against migrants and refugees. Our correspondents went first to Bolu, a city with a xenophobic mayor who wants all foreigners out of Turkey.
It's a city north of Ankara, known for its hillside retreats and freshwater springs. But the name Bolu is making headlines in Turkey for an entirely different reason. The city has become the symbol of the anti-Arab sentiment sweeping the country. Saif is an Iraqi national living in the city since 2014. He prefers to remain anonymous.
Here they don't care if you're Syrian or Iraqi. It's the same to them. A while ago, when some Turkish soldiers were killed in Syria, they started being nasty to all Arabs. They told us, "Go back home and fight. Why are we dying in your country? But how am I to blame?"
Saif escaped a war, but says the atmosphere in Bolu is another kind of violence.
The psychological war is bigger than the real war. If you work, they look at you as if you're rich, like you're taking their jobs. They push back against you all the time. This war is stronger than weapons.
Bolu's municipality and province are in the hands of the CHP, the biggest opposition party, and have passed new local measures that target foreigners. They now have to pay more for water and energy bills. Getting married now costs them 100 times more than Turks at City Hall. Most extreme of all, foreigners are not allowed outside after 9 p.m. Mayor Tanju Osman refused to answer our questions because we belong to the international press, but he recently accepted to be interviewed on the set of a Turkish TV station.
70% of foreigners in Bolu are Iraqis. Is there a war in Iraq? Our businessmen bring workers and invest in Iraq, in Baghdad, in Erbil. The guest system has gone on for too long. We should plan for them to go back, because the numbers are increasing. How will you integrate an Afghan? Our 15-year-old girls are being sexually harassed by them, and the Afghans don't even realize it, because they're used to getting married to 9-year-olds. How are you going to integrate these people?
Turkey hosts more refugees than any other country in the world. 3.6 million of them are Syrian. Iraqis account for another 330,000. Both groups are protected in that they are not allowed to be sent back to their countries, unlike the growing Afghan population. But none are technically refugees, according to Turkish law. It's a loophole that suited the Turkish government at the onset of the Syrian war, but that has reached its limits.
So there is no any big policy, exact policy to integration in Turkey. So this is a problem. And there is no any transparency in migration policy.
The worsening economic situation is partly to blame, as migrants are accused of being responsible for rising prices and job scarcity. But this grassroots consortium of refugee rights groups and academics say the most dangerous forms of xenophobia are coming from the top. Taha El Ghazi is a Syrian national employed by the Turkish Education Ministry. He's also an activist and has met with political parties to convince them to keep refugees out of their slogans.
Of course, all factions are to blame in this issue. The government and the opposition, everyone should be responsible for stopping the hate speech, because it doesn't only threaten the Syrian community, but the Turkish community too.
Polls show anti-migration sentiment is on the rise. The latest violent flare-up occurred in a suburb of Ankara in August, when Syrian shops and homes were attacked after the death of a Turkish young man. Months later, tensions are by some accounts even higher, with refugees fearing they might be next.
And finally, there are high hopes for Egypt in this edition of the Africa Cup of Nations in Cameroon. The Pharaohs are the most successful team in the tournament's history and are eyeing an 8th African title. Liverpool FC's star striker Mohamed Salah is captaining the Egyptian side and fans are optimistic. Yana Lee has this.
A world-class striker, a new manager and a pool of fresh talent. The expectations are high among Egyptian fans for this year's Africa Cup of Nations. Once again, the country's talisman, Mohamed Salah, is reporting for duty as captain.
جايين نحارب ان احنا نوصل لنهاية البطولة وناخد البطولة إن شاء الله. I didn't win anything with the national team yet. I'm sure I'm gonna do it one day. Hopefully this one.
The Pharaohs are the most successful team in the Cup's history, with 7 victories, including an unprecedented winning streak in 2006, 2008 and 2010. New manager Carlos Queiroz brings his experience to the North African team. The former Real Madrid and Manchester United coach has called on some of Egypt's biggest international stars for the tournament. Joining Liverpool striker Mo Salah is Aston Villa's Mahmoud Hassan, also known as Trezeguet, Stuttgart's Omar Marmoush and Arsenal's Mohamed El Neni. A star-studded squad that only needs cohesion and chemistry to do well.
Even the players from the Egyptian League are playing at a very high level. We have some of the best players in Africa and some international stars too.
In 2019, the Pharaohs were booted out in the round of 16, a humiliating defeat for the then host nation. This year, with a combination of youth and experience, Egypt is hoping that they can break their own record and be crowned champions of the continent for the 8th time.
Well, that's it from us here on Middle East Matters. There's more world news coming up next. Stay tuned.